I don't think the game's over.
Welcome into another episode of Triple Zeros. I'm your host, Josh Buckhalter. Please follow me on Twitter at Facebook page, Clocker Sports, the website, clockersports.com, and the email address is clockersports@gmail.com. Now, normally we try to cover a little bit of NBA and NFL, and I try to go all around because that's just what I like to do. But anytime I get a chance to talk about my favorite teams, my hometown teams, I have to jump on it. We've done a lot of Bulls talk. We finally get to do some Bears talk, and I am so very happy to welcome JJ Stankevitz onto the show. JJ covers the Bears for NBC Sports Chicago. You can follow him on Twitter at JJ Stankevitz. He also hosts the Under the Center podcast, so there's no mystery here as to what we're going to be talking about. It's going to be football. It's going to be Bears football, and if you don't like it, tough, because that's what we're going to do today. So that being said, JJ, man, thank you for joining me, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Josh. I'm glad that we have some actual football to talk about.
Oh my gosh, you said it from your lips to God's ears, man. It's been a long time. I often joke about during the shutdown how I was really writing hypotheticals every single week and just trying to figure out something else to come up with, and now I finally get to have something to put down. Now, that being said, the NFL's rules have shifted this year, and training camp is no longer open to the fans. It's only open to a select group of media, and that's partially why you are here. I want to ask you a lot of questions about the Bears. But before I get into that, I noticed in your bio you are a twin dad. I have two boys, but they're about 5 years apart. I have to ask you, what is that experience like having two children running around the house the same age?
Well, it's nothing like having two kids 5 years apart. I'm just guessing. They're only about 8.5 months right now, so they're not really mobile yet. Pray for me when they do become mobile. It's really cool. It's really neat to see them like interact, and they've got a best friend for life. And it's also been really cool with my job because Matt Nagy has twins. He's a twin dad too. So he and I have had some good. He and I have had some good conversations about what it's like to raise two boys and be a twin dad, and it's a really neat experience.
That's awesome. I honestly think God was intervening there and separated the kids by that means. I know I'd go crazy with two, especially when they're young like that. So kudos to you, sir. Blessings for you, and congratulations on the relatively still newborn. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem. Let's jump right into it though. So, as you mentioned, football is back. They are in training camp right now. There won't be preseason, so we're going to have to wait to get some actual action. And that's why I want to kind of get your thoughts on where this team is headed. And I want to start off on the offense because that's the question that everybody wants to know about, where they're going to go. And my first focus is going to be the tight ends. You have been big on the tight ends this offseason, so let's start there. What is it exactly that surprised you, impressed you the most about Jimmy Graham and Cole Kmet?
Well, I'll say I'm surprised. First of all, I mean, you look at the tape with Jimmy Graham last year in Green Bay, and it's not impressive. There was one play in particular where it was against the Eagles in a goal line or red zone situation where Jimmy Graham should have just bodied up this defensive back, and he did not do it. And he just kind of one-handed this ball, and it was incomplete. And looking at that play, it kind of felt like, man, like Jimmy Graham's over the hill. And watching him, I know it's only been 4 practices up at Hallis Hall, but watching him up at Hallis Hall, this does not look like a dude who's over the hill. It looks like a guy who he certainly still has the size at 6'7", 260 something pounds, but the drive, the physicality, the savviness, all the things that made Jimmy Graham one of the best tight ends in the NFL for years have shown up at Hallis Hall. And I'm not saying he's, we're getting vintage Jimmy Graham here. But I do think if Jimmy Graham can keep this level of energy up that we've seen out of him since being allowed into Hallis Hall, the Bears are going to have a halfway decent tight end here at the U, which is the position that Trey Burton played / did not play last year. And I think that is such a huge key to Matt Nagy's offense And if they can get something out of Jimmy Graham there, it doesn't have to be all pro or Pro Bowl level play, but if they can just get like solid tight end production out of him, reliable tight end production, this offense is going to be a lot better. And all I have to do is encourage you to go look at Tariq Cohen's stats when Trey Burton was healthy in 2018, and then when Trey Burton was either not on the field or not healthy in 2019. It is a world of difference between those two numbers, and that, I think, can, in very large part, be chalked up to the Bears not having that U tight end out there. And if they get that in Jimmy Graham, Tariq Cohen's going to be better. This whole offense is going to be better. And I think Matt Nagy's going to be able to do a lot more with this offense than what he was able to do last year.
That's interesting you bring up Tariq Cohen, because we often hear about how a productive tight end typically takes away from the catches of a running back. And when we're talking about Tariq Cohen, that's what we're talking about in terms of production from him. Now, before we go to running backs completely, I do want to ask you, what are reasonable expectations for Cole Kmet? Have you liked what you've seen so far? Do you think we're going to get will fans be pleasantly surprised? Because there's a little bit of, unrest over taking a tight end that high when a lot of people don't consider him to be a game breaker.
Right. Well, and I think it's interesting with Kmet, and it's a good question, Josh, because what I've seen out of him is he looks like a physical freak who's a rookie. And rookie tight ends make a lot of mistakes. And it is one of the hardest positions to transition from college to the pros. You see rookie tight ends historically do not have a lot of success. Usually tight end growth comes in year 2 or year 3 in the league. You know, for every Rob Gronkowski, there's a guy who you've never heard of, or I guess maybe an Adam Shaheen, who just does not work out as a rookie, or in the case of Adam Shaheen, ever. And I think Kmet, the expectations on him kind of need to be tempered a little bit, and that's okay. The Bears are not expecting Cole Kmet to come in and have 600 yards of receiving and 7 touchdowns. If he can come in and split time with Demetrius Harris at that Y tight end position, which is the inline tight end, that's a position the Bears have not had any talent at since Matt Nagy arrived in Chicago. And it's the same thing with Jimmy Graham. They don't need a Pro Bowler at the Y tight end. They just need someone who's competent, who can be acceptable. Well, yeah, and just a guy who you can trust out on the field to do his assignment. That doesn't mean he's going to get the ball every time. That doesn't mean he's not going to lose, a blocking assignment here or there. But the Y tight ends the Bears have had before Cole Kmet and Demetrius Harris were Deion Sims and Adam Shaheen for primarily the last couple of years. And then, the guys that are thrown in there last year, J.P. Holtz is kind of more like an H fullback type guy. He's not really a true Y tight end. They tried Bradley Sowell there. That didn't work.
Right.
And it's a position that Matt Nagy has just not had. And I think in Cole Kmet and Demetrius Harris, I want to be clear, there's a combination of them. They've got, I think, a serviceable Y tight end out of those two guys. And that should allow the Bears to go with more 12 personnel, which they have not used very much over the last 2 years. And if you look at what the Chiefs and the Eagles do, the Eagles have used more 12 personnel than anyone in the last 2 years, and the Chiefs are fourth in that. So the two closest cousins to Matt Nagy's offense use a lot of 12 personnel, and Matt Nagy can't use it because he has another personnel there. I think that changes this year.
I think that's been one of the most surprising things to me is knowing how important that position is to Matt Nagy's offense and the lack of – well, I can't say that the lack of attempts because, they, like you said, they had Trey Burton and they tried to throw some bodies at it, but it just hasn't worked out. Now, do you think – have there been any other surprises among the tight end group, or is this kind of just the chalk guys that we're expecting to see, like the top 3 with Kmet, Graham, and Harris?
Yeah, I think it's probably the chalk guys. I think, honestly, I was most surprised that Ben Brodiker got cut before training camp started, just given he was a serviceable backup at both tight end positions, a special teams guy. But mostly, I think the Bears are decent at tight end. I kind of wrote about this on Friday on NBCSportsChicago.com that I'm starting to kind of buy the hype a little bit. Like, I see Cole Kmet and Jimmy Graham and Demetrius Harris, and, like, these are big dudes. These are guys who are 6'6", 6'7", Komet and Graham are in the 260s. Demetrius Harris is listed at 230, but in pads looks closer to 250. And you know, I know the Bears have had some big dudes at tight end previously, be it Bradley Sowell or Adam Shaheen or Deion Sims. But those guys were not good at playing tight end. And
no,
what we've seen out of the Bears tight ends, I wrote this in the last 4 days, is more than we saw out of the Bears tight ends last year in training camp, the entirety of it. And I think that just on its head is encouraging. And I'm not saying that the Bears are going to have world beaters at tight end, but I think all they need is just like a solid tight end room. They just need like B- play from their tight ends, and this offense is going to be so much better because of it. I mean, they got essentially like a B-level play out of Trey Burton in 2018. And the offense was about league average overall. But Tariq Cohen had a great year. And I keep going back to Tariq on this thing. Like, he was so hamstrung last year because they didn't have any tight ends. He told us in the offseason, like, whenever he lined up in the backfield, there was always a linebacker on him. And whenever he motioned out into the slot or out wide, he always had a DB on him. He never had those mismatch opportunities that he got so much in 2018, and that was because the Bears could use Trey Burton. I think those mismatch opportunities are going to go up from where they were in 2018, certainly 2019. If the Bears can get Tariq Cohen on the field with some 12 personnel, it's going to be really hard to defend him because you have to allocate, a safety or a linebacker to a tight end, and what are you going to do with Cohen? You're going to have to either, you can motion him into the backfield and all of a sudden you got a safety lined up on him, he can run the ball, or you motion him out wide, and if you got to put that safety on a tight end, then you get a linebacker on Cohen, and he's going to toast that guy. So I think it's a really exciting proposition for the Bears just to be able to get into more 12 personnel because of the tight ends they have on this roster.
And that's a good transition point. And talking about Tariq Cohen, I'm often the guy who says that a lot of the issues is that how they use both he and Montgomery. When Montgomery's on the field, you kind of know they're going to run the ball. They'll lean more towards that. Cohen obviously would be towards the pass. But let's assume that Cohen gets healthier, but he's catching passes. Is there a way that, or do you foresee rather, Matt Nagy trying to use Montgomery more in a more versatile role this season to get some of those abilities that we heard about so much last offseason? I don't think we got enough of the pass catching David Montgomery. And on top of that, does he look more aggressive so far in camp?
I don't know if you can tell if he looks more aggressive yet. I will say, as a general observation, Bears defensive line is really good. No one can run against them. No one can run against them in the regular season. I mean, Dalvin Cook gained about 3 yards against them last year. So I'm not really worried totally about the Bears run game yet, but they do need evidence of improvements there. I think your question, though, Josh, about David Montgomery and his versatility in the passing game is a really good one, because you're right, we didn't really see that last year. There was one play I remember against the Eagles where Montgomery kind of flashed open. He was wide open. Trubisky hit him for a big gain. And it was like, all right, that's like the David Montgomery that we thought we were getting. Like that's why you get rid of Jordan Howard and draft David Montgomery, right? Is because he can, catch balls out of the backfield and be that kind of dynamic, versatile weapon that Matt Nagy had in Kansas City with Kareem Hunt. But we never really saw it last year. And I think that's just, it was more a product of the disjointedness of the Bears offense in general than it was anything David Montgomery was doing. I think David Montgomery is a good running back who I'm not worried about his skill set. I think the offense last year just completely got away from Matt Nagy, from Mitch Trubisky, from pretty much everyone involved whose name isn't Allen Robinson. And that led to, what you saw to Tariq Cohen, which was just mind-boggling how a guy like that could have, average 4 yards a touch. And David Montgomery not becoming that versatile guy out of the backfield. I think the Bears are in a much better place this year to go into 2020 not as disjointed. But we'll see. I mean, it's still very early on in training camp. The run game still is going to be a concern of mine until it's not. And we'll just kind of see where it goes. But the running back depth chart is not much for the Bears running game, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I get that. So we're bouncing back out to the wide receivers now, and you recently wrote about Darnell Mooney. Talk to me a little bit about him and what's been exciting you the most about him.
He's fast, and I know that showed up on the film at Tulane, so we knew he was fast. But you know what? He's quick, and I think there's a difference sometimes for guys who are just fast versus guys who are quick. And Darnell Mooney is quick and he's fast. And I don't know if I was really expecting to see him as much as I have over the last couple days. He's involved in this offense, and asking coaches and teammates about him, it seems clear that the Bears have a plan for this guy. And it doesn't mean you should go rushing to make Darnell Mooney your sleeper pick in fantasy football or anything. But, like, I think he's a guy who's got who can carve out a good role in this offense. A guy who can not only stretch the field, but get the ball in his hands and see what he can do. And the Bears have not really had that stretch the field guy since Nagy got here. Like, Taylor Gabriel sort of was it, but he actually turned into like kind of a rugged, tough receiver at the sticks.
He
more
did.
more than he turned into that downfield threat that I think some people are hoping he would be. So I like what the Bears did in the offseason, going and getting Ted Ginn as the veteran who can do that, but then taking a shot on Darnell Mooney as someone who can also kind of push the ball downfield and stretch the field a little bit. I'm interested to see how he does as camp kind of turns into a grind. Because when I asked wide receivers coach Mike Fury about him this week, he kind of brought up like, okay, we'll see what he does when we really get into camp and we keep adding more onto his plate and the pads are on and you're getting tired. And, it was interesting because Fury he didn't downplay what Mooney can do, but he definitely didn't. Right. And it was sort of like, hey, like, it's still early, which also for Mike Fury to do that, Mike Fury is generally a guy who sometimes is overwhelmingly positive with the guys he's talking about. So I thought that was a little interesting. But I tell you what, Josh, I like what I see out of this kid. We'll see if it continues. But if it does, I think the Bears got something here.
That's nice, especially because of I guess fans put it on themselves, but the expectations that people had for Riley Ridley given his bloodlines last year, to see a guy coming in drafted later who could have a bigger impact sooner, that'd be a great thing. Because, and like you said, the Bears needed speed really, really bad, even though they brought in Ginn at 35 and with not the most reliable hands. It's good to see an injection of some youth in that position. So real quick, does Jermaina Fetty win the right guard position?
Yes. I don't want to say he's already won it, but in talking to offensive line coach Juan Castillo this week, I asked him straight up, like, is this a Fetty's job to lose? And he was basically like, he said he's a position coach. He's not going to completely say that, but what he did say was, look, I mean, Jermaina Fetty's been in the league for 4 years, so of course he's getting the looks right now at right guard with Rashad Coward behind him. But it really is Jermaina Fetty's job to lose. If he continues to just kind of play okay, he's going to win the job. I don't know if I've been like overwhelmingly impressed with Jermaina Fetty. I also will say, like, it's really hard to tell with offensive linemen who's doing well and who's doing not in training camp practices. But if the Bears get to the end of this and they feel like Jermaina Fetty handled Akeem Hicks about as possibly well as he could handle, which is not going to be well, but there are very few right guards in the NFL who actually can handle Akeem Hicks, then he's going to be the guy. And I think the Bears sneakily kind of believe that a Fetty kicking inside is a high upside move. In Seattle, he had this really bad rep as a right tackle where he was getting beat all the time. He was committing penalties all over the place. But the Bears saw his film from 2016 when he played guard, and they liked something in there. They like his athleticism, and I think they think he fits a lot better at guard than he does at tackle. So we'll see if that gamble pays off, because it better, because he's the only real move they've made on that offensive line.
Now, speaking of that, are we more likely to see a bounce back performance, and I guess it's relative because I don't know how great you thought they were in the first place, but are we more likely to see a bounce back from the tackles in Massey and Leno, or from Whitehair and Daniels on the interior?
It's a good question. I think I'm actually going to go with Massey and Leno.
Wow.
Because those guys in 2018 were good in pass protection. They weren't just fine. They were good. And from a run blocking perspective, I don't know how much you're going to get out of those guys. But I think from a pass protection standpoint, I'm expecting Leno and Massey to be better this year than they were last year. Last year was weird. I think
everything
Leno
went wrong last year.
Well, right. Everything went wrong. I think Leno kind of maybe didn't adjust to some of the league's emphasis on, like hands to the face and certain penalties with like hooking, turning that into a hold. And it kind of got him off on the wrong foot last year. I think this year should be better in that regard, just because Charles Leno, he's a veteran, he's a smart player. Right. And I think he gets a little too much abuse around town for who he is. I think Leno or Whitehair and Daniels are interesting because I think those guys are the guys who are really going to have to power the run game. If the Bears want to keep going inside zone, and there's some indications they might be using outside zone a little bit more this year, but inside zone is kind of the bread and butter of this scheme. And if they want to keep using that, they're going to have to go over the left side with Whitehair and Daniels kind of leading that charge. I think Daniels still has some upside that maybe hasn't been tapped into. Whitehair is he's a solid player,
right?
A guy you want to have on your offensive line. But I think Daniels kind of needs to make that year 3 jump in terms of his technique, in terms of his consistency for the Bears' run game to really get going here. So I don't know if it's necessarily a bounce back for those guys like it would be for Leno and Massey, but I think they're important if the Bears want to get this run game going.
Understood. Now, I agree. Hopefully Juan Castillo coming in is the boost that they need. I think we all got excited about Harry Heastan last year, so hopefully it's not the same case this time around.
I don't mean to burst your bubble on that, but like I've been so skeptical of this because, man, if you don't think Harry Heastan can be the best coach for your offensive line, and you think Juan Castillo can, nothing against Juan Castillo.
No, I get it.
Look, if Harry Heastan can't fix your offensive line, then maybe you need new players. That's more what I'm getting at, not a new coach.
You were giving me so much positive energy too. Oh,
I'm sorry.
No, it's
sorry
all
to bring
good.
it down.
I'm always weary of putting too much on a coach anyway. I just know it's training camp, man. That's how it is. When you get the new flashy toy, you kind of want to talk about it and talk it up. So, but the focal point and what really everybody cares about, the quarterback position. There has been, I don't want to say mixed messaging, but the talk out of camp so far has been neither guy has really separated themselves, and I don't know if that's really concerning me because when you go into each individual, you have Mitch who is looking better mechanically, but still making some of the same decisions, having some of the same decision-making issues that he had last year, and then with Foles, it's kind of just underwhelming, and I'm terrified. So I just want to know, like, first of all, am I overblowing that? Am I taking too much from that? And second of all, how long do you think it'll take for them to figure out who's going to be the guy?
I don't know if you're overblowing concern about the Bears quarterback situation, because I don't know if you can overblow it. Like the Bears are trying to do something that just like doesn't work that often in the NFL, and you're right. I mean, Nick Foles has been kind of underwhelming, but I'm not necessarily surprised by that. If Nick Foles is still underwhelming in a week, I will be a little more concerned. And Trubisky, it's fascinating though, watching Mitch and just being like, this dude is the better quarterback. He's got to make better decisions. And this has been the problem with Mitch, and this has been the scouting report on Mitch for a while, is like athletically, he's a great athlete. He's got a great arm. He's got great zip on the ball. He's got everything you want in a quarterback except the decision making. And that is, and some of the footwork stuff should be mentioned in there too. But he's a guy who just like, I think what you're referencing is what happened in Thursday's practice where he ran out of bounds on a goal line. It was first and goal from the 1, and he runs out of bounds and loses 2 yards. And it's just like, you can't do that. And it was at the end of a good practice for him. And you just wonder how Matt Nagy and John DeFilippo and Bill Lazor are weighing a mistake like that against the entirety of what was a pretty good practice. Like,
no, and that's exactly go ahead.
No, but it's like, can you live with that boneheaded mistake if the rest of it is good? Or are you going to say, all right, you know what, Foles isn't going to do something like that. It may not be as impressive. He may not be, he doesn't have the upside of Mitch, but at least he's not going to run out of bounds on a first and goal from the 1. Like, I think there might be something to be said for that. It's going to be really interesting how this quarterback competition is decided, to kind of answer the second part of your question. I think the Bears are going to drag it out really as long as they can. But they're going to have to make a decision by, I think, probably September 4th or 5th, the weekend of, or Labor Day weekend, is when they're going to have to make a decision on this thing, because then you get into Lions week, and this thing cannot continue into Lions week.
No, you got to start.
You've got to pick, right? Yeah, you got to have a guy. Mm-hmm. So really, I think they only have about 2 more weeks left of this,
cutting it close
to really figure out. Yeah, well, and Nagy can slow play it as much as he wants.
I think they're feeling the pressure, though. They have to. You don't make this move if you don't know that you have to kind of make something happen.
Right. Well, and I'm interested whenever the Bears do start having scrimmages at Hallett's Hall, which is something Nagy has alluded to. We don't know when that's going to be on the schedule, but he's alluded to it. And I think those are going to take a large chunk of the evaluation here between Trubisky and Foles, because it was supposed to be decided in preseason games. Right. You obviously don't have those anymore. So now you got to simulate game atmospheres as much as you can. And I think that's where you're going to see potentially some separation between these two, because right now, I will say Mitch has a slight edge. I think if everything is even, Mitch has an edge. And I think right now, even it's not necessarily even. I think he has a slight edge. If we're putting a percentage on it, it might be like 54 to 46. Mitch right now, it's not really that, it's something Foles can make up. But early on, I think Mitch kind of has an edge here.
And that's understandable with him being the incumbent and the more familiarity in this version of the offense. But going back to that mistake that you said, it reminded me so much of plays we've seen from him where they've had successful or drives that looked like they were going to be successful, only to have him make a mistake in the end zone, forcing a pass to Allen Robinson, or like he did, I believe, like something like 8 times last year, running out of bounds like that, causing a sack on the offensive line, bringing down their overall grade. So that's concerning for me, and to have Nagy say that he won't do that again, knowing that Mitch is in year 4, that was like But then, like, to hear the Nick Foles is not separating himself, I almost feel like Nick Foles is the quarterback that we were all begging for last year, to just do your job and make it happen. Don't go outside of the structure of the play, but just keep things on the rails. And I'm sorry, Nick Foles, not Mitch. And then Mitch is the guy who, with the upside, Mitch is the playmaker. We know that. And like you said, it's never been a question of talent for him. It's always the mental. So for me, that was where my big pause and why I had to ask you about that, because I that was a concerning moment for me, because it's repeat. I've seen it. As soon as they said it happened, I just thought back to last year, like, oh no.
Yep.
So hopefully they figure it out.
When you're saying that, Josh, I think about how many games the Bears might have won that they lost if Foles were just there to come off the bench as a backup, because Chase Daniel was never a guy who's going to, play for Mitch when Mitch was healthy.
No.
Do they win against the Rams? Do they win against the Chargers? Do you win against the Eagles? Like, those 3 games, just right off the top of my head, do you win against the Packers in week 1? I mean, like, there were opportunities there for the Bears to win games if they just had a quarterback who could do his job. And Mitch had a couple games where it was like, oh my, like the Lions game on Thanksgiving and then the Cowboys game a week later were like, those were the Mitch upside games. Those are the games that Mitch won, and that I'm not necessarily sure Nick Foles would have won those games. But do if you balance those out, you take those 2 wins away, you put 4 more wins on the Bears ledger, gets them to 10 wins, and they're probably in the playoffs. So, that is where Foles comes into play here. But Foles still has to earn it. He still does have to earn his way onto the field this year.
And I guess that's what you want. Like I said, I've been consistent with this throughout the offseason that while I might not personally, think that Mitch has it, he is the best chance for the Bears' long-term success. They need him to be good for their long-term health. If they don't, even if Nick Foles is good this year, that does nothing for them, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. So for long-term health of the organization, Mitch is the best bet. I'm just not at that point where I can put that faith in him anymore. Real quick, I want to go through the defense. There's not as many questions, but there are some, so I just want to touch on those real quick before we get you out of here. My first question, Robert Quinn, are there concerns over him still ramping up?
Not yet. I think that's something we're all kind of keeping an eye on, but he is out there. He is present in practice. He's just not participating in team drills yet. So if we get to, I think probably like middle of next week is when it might become something that we really get concerned about. But for the moment, what it sounds like is that they're just really taking it slow with him. They're trying to make sure that he doesn't get in too fast and you have a soft tissue injury that then keeps him out for a part of the early part of the season. And I think the Bears are doing generally they've gone about this smart. A lot of coaches on that team know what happened in 2011, the lockout year, when there were a lot more soft tissue injuries than usual because, guys hadn't been training, they hadn't been working out the way that they should have been in the off season without access to facilities. And around the NFL, coaches have done a good job of kind of slow playing this. And if that means that Robert Quinn misses a week of practice, Robert Quinn can miss a week of practice and be okay. Right. Dude's been in the league for a really long time. So you're not worried about him. I think you'd be more worried if it were a younger guy or if this drags on and he starts missing 2 weeks of practice or 2.5 weeks of practice. Then you start worrying about his availability for week 1 against the Lions.
And speaking of veterans and their health, Akeem Hicks returned, and you mentioned earlier how good the defensive line has looked. Is there any worry of drop-off with Eddie Goldman opting out due to COVID reasons, or are the Bears just going to simply adapt and being more of sub-packages than they would be normally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's going to be a drop-off because Eddie Goldman's a really good football player.
So underrated.
And and you just can't replace what he does. And it's not just in base. What he does in those sub packages, Josh, is you can play two D linemen, 2 guys in 3-point stances, because Eddie Goldman can soak up that double team between the center and the guard. Mm-hmm. And that just allows kind of the rest of the defense to operate. What Eddie Goldman can do is something that not a lot of other football players can do. That's why the Bears paid him a lot of money in that contract extension. That being said, Bilal Nichols is a good football player who I think we kind of forgot about last year because he had that hand injury in week 2 against the Broncos. He never really was back from that. It kind of stunted his development a little bit last year. And then, Akeem Hicks getting hurt early on, that did not help the Bears defensive line too. So I think that, Bilal Nichols playing the nose next to Akeem Hicks, they're probably going to be okay. It's not going to be like having Eddie Goldman out there, certainly, but I think the Bears' defense can still be good. It can still be successful against the run with Nichols and Hicks taking most of the snaps there. And then, Roy Robertson Harris is a really, really good football player who can rotate in. He can kind of play. He's not going to play the nose, but he can play just about every other technique on that line. And then, they have some depth guys they like Brent Urban and John Jenkins and Abdullah Anderson, who, the guy who, we were talking about Juan Castillo earlier and hoping that he could be a difference maker here. Most position coaches are not difference makers. Jay Rodgers is the exception, the Bears defensive line coach. He is a really, really good football coach who gets his defensive linemen ready and has coached a lot of guys into being really good players like Nichols and Roy Robertson Harris. And if you remember Nick Williams last year, a guy who, with Jay Rodgers coaching him, went from being out of the league at, a couple of years ago to having 6.5 sacks and making $13 million from the Detroit Lions.
Right.
So I think the best thing I can say about the Bears' ability to replace Eddie Goldman is that they've got some good players and they got a really damn good coach at that position.
Nice. Okay, well, the last group that I want to ask you about is the ones who are going to be reliant on those guys up front doing their jobs, and specifically strong safety and right corner. Who are the leaders right now, and who do you expect to be starting come week 1 against the Lions?
So it's kind of unclear who the leaders are right now at those two spots, which is not necessarily a bad thing early on in camp. If I had to guess, I would probably say Sean Gibson gets a start at safety. I think Deion Bush, though, is giving him a real run for his money. And Deion Bush has looked good. Deion Bush looked good last camp. Just didn't really get a chance because he had HaHa Clinton-Dix there. Deion Bush is a good, solid football player who is a good backup safety. I don't know if he's a good starter to Sean Gibson. Has proven to be a good starter in the NFL. So I'll give him the edge here. But then, at corner, I sort of get the sense that the Bears don't know yet because they're still kind of waiting to fully unleash Jalen Johnson in practice. He's still sort of limited from the shoulder procedure he underwent in March, it seems like. Chuck Pagano's been pretty honest about that with us. And I think Jalen Johnson starts, but I am not sure it's week 1. I would not be shocked if Kevin Tolliver gets the nod in week 1 because Jalen Johnson just isn't quite ready yet. The other situation I would not be surprised if it happened where the Bears are able to kind of slowly introduce Jalen Johnson into this defense by, in base, having Buster Skrine be the outside corner opposite Kyle Fuller. And then when you go to sub, he slides back to nickel where he is better. And then you have Jalen Johnson playing outside in sub. And I know you mostly go sub. These days, about 66% of your plays are in sub. But that then doesn't mean that Jalen Johnson is on the field every single snap against Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones. You can kind of get him eased in a little bit better that way. So the Bears have some options here. I think Artie Burns had a really good shot at starting, which is not necessarily a compliment to the Bears depth chart at cornerback. But, before his injury, I think he had a pretty decent chance of winning that job. Kevin Tolliver's a guy who, the Bears have liked his upside, but he hasn't quite realized it. Yeah, exactly. So I don't think they necessarily are going to be gung-ho and jazzed about starting Kevin Tolliver. But if Jalen Johnson isn't ready, they might have to for a week or two until he steps in there. And if you remember, Josh, back in 2018, Roquan Smith had that bizarre training camp where he held out and then he got hurt. Jalen Johnson, it sort of feels like he's in a similar position where it's like everyone knows he's going to start and he is the best cornerback there. But Nick Kwiatkowski started week 1 against the Packers. And maybe Kevin Tolliver gets that nod against the Lions, but then by the time the Giants come to town a week later, it's Jalen Johnson starting.
You presented an interesting scenario where they have Skrine on the outside. That's not something that's been brought up a lot, but it's definitely an option, and some might scoff at it because of Skrine's height, but he's such a feisty corner that I could see him giving a guy like a Marvin Jones, who is an athletic person and bigger, but can be susceptible to that physical style of play. I could see that being a savvy move, and especially if it allows them to not have Tolliver on the field. Look, I know they're excited about his upside, but I'm of the belief that he's going to end up ultimately being just a guy, and that's not to say that he's not. You make it to the NFL, you obviously have a lot of talent, but I'm not sure that he's worthy of that starting position. JJ Stankevitz, I want to thank you again so much for joining me on Triple Zeros and enlightening me. I'm upset you didn't give me better news about the offensive line or about the quarterback situation, but I understand. I appreciate the honesty.
I'm telling you, the tight ends, though, like that, if you want to start hyping something after a couple days of training camp practices, go with the tight ends. But I'm still worried, Josh, that the offensive line might be the undoing of this team this year. So we'll see. We'll see, man.
JJ, I hope you'll join me again. It was a pleasure having you.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for having me on, Josh.
He is JJ Stankevitz. You can follow him on Twitter at JJ Stankevitz. As I said, covers the Bears for NBC Sports Chicago and hosts the Under Center Let me try it again. Host the Under Center podcast. Check them out everywhere that podcasts are downloaded. JJ, thanks again, and this is going to do it for this episode of Triple Zeros. I'm Josh Buckhalter. Follow me on Twitter at JoshGBuck. Hit up the Facebook page, Clocker Sports, website, clockersports.com, email address, clockersports@gmail.com. Until the very next time, I'm gone.